Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance to working Rhode Island families. We hope you enjoy this evening's edition.
It is a pleasure to be here tonight. Brothers and sisters, both young and old. Okay, it's very good to see the young people here. My portion of the program is going to focus on 4 points, really setting the tenor of the times, if you will. I'm going to briefly talk about nationally what's going on politically, then get into the rise of Luther, the making of him. Thirdly, get into Luther's ideology. And then fourth, talk about the road to the Dorr War, which Scott will pick up on later in the program. Much of the social and economic changes that we see during the early 19th century in America can be best displayed and understood through the Jacksonian political movement of the 1830s and 40s. When Andrew Jackson was elected president, many people believed he could make the American dream come true. Jackson's presidency was called the age of the common man. And he felt government should be run by the common man itself and not the aristocratic notions that really embedded themselves after the Revolution, not only in Rhode Island, but in America. The Jacksonian movement represented not the insurgency of a specific class or region, but really a notion of a diverse coalition, what that looked like. And it's much different, than we might think of today. But it really helped set the foundation of what things would become later on after the Civil War, because this is the time period before the Civil War, that we're going to be talking about today. Now, during the same period, Rhode Island had been rapidly industrializing. As a result of its rapidly industrializing economy, Rhode Island was an early site for labor agitation, and in particular Providence, which hosted perhaps the first region-wide meeting of workers' delegates in 1825. This climate formed because class differences really set foot in Rhode Island, in particular in Pawtucket. It really became a public issue. One of the first class conflicts, as I talked about, in the nation took place in Pawtucket. And what this really illustrated was early inequities in the economic system and the hardships of course, the working poor. Now I'm going to go into the second part of my program. It's really about the rise of Luther and the making of him. The time period in the early 19th century, it was really right for the growth of a working class radical. It was a time when working class people needed to have faith and hope in Rhode Island. Seth Luther would be that someone to have the faith and hope in for the working class. He should be crowned with being one of the founding fathers of the American middle class. He was a true fighter for the people's cause. He became an organizer and orator for the fight of labor. Luther fought and advocated for more worker protections, the idea of a minimum wage law, the abolishment of imprisonment for debt, state constitutional reforms, the ability to collectively bargain, tougher banking regulations, which I'm going to talk about today, and of course, the Holy Grail, universal public education. Yeah. He was especially active on issues pertaining to the exploitation of children and was instrumental in helping pass the nation's first Labor Control Act in Massachusetts in 1842. Seth Luther was a beacon of hope for the working people of the state and also the region. The life of Seth Luther begins in 1795 in Rhode Island. Seth Luther is considered by many labor historians to be one of the most influential labor leaders prior to the American Civil War. The environment in Rhode Island was ripe for the growth of a working class radical. Luther was raised under the roof of a Revolutionary War soldier. His mother, Rebecca, had deep roots to the First Baptist Church in Providence, which was the same founded by none other than Roger Williams. His brothers made a living through pre-industrial trades like blacksmith, weavers, and shoemakers, or cobblers, you might call them. Luther had 6 years of a common school education and served an apprenticeship in carpentry. By his own account, much of his educational abilities came from newspapers, books, and also the constant habit of observing others, observation. By 1817, Luther left Rhode Island and traveled the western frontier of this young country. His travels took him through the Ohio River Valley region, upper Canada, and then down south to the eastern portion of Florida. He traveled and survived the harsh conditions for several years with the help of both the slave and the American Indian. Luther would later insist that it was these shared experiences with the same slave and the American Indian on the frontier that gave him the grasp of the basic uniformities that transcended distinctions of class or race. Seth Luther's deep-rooted Christian ideas also, and the democratic tradition of natural law became even more embedded into his ideology. This would eventually evolve into his spiritual and powerful approach, which we will talk about. I believe that Luther's travels out west greatly influenced his ideology in view of the democracy for the working class. This would explain his nomadic ways during the course of his life. When Luther would return in his early 30s, it was an unfamiliar New England that did meet him. It was totally different from the democratic spirit of the West he had become really accustomed to throughout his travels. The class distinctions in New England really frustrated him. Upon his return, Luther worked in various New England mills and experienced the long 13 to 14-hour workdays. That is really unbelievable when you think about it, folks. The long days, coupled with seeing the stunted lives of children, woman weavers, and the rigors of the factory system really took a hold on him psychologically. But Luther would not just go along with the tide. He would try and rise above it. Now this is going to start the third portion of my program. It really gets into his ideology, Lutheranism 101, if you will, the people's patriot and prophet. I am coining it. It's really a brand of unionism, republicanism, and also Christianity. Luther's career occurred at a time when the echoes of the Revolutionary War overlapped with the emergence of industrialization and industrialism. It was a time period when central ideas of the revolution could be contrasted most poignantly with the social ills of the day in America and also in Rhode Island. As the son of a Revolutionary War soldier, Luther often called attention to the discrepancy between the ideals for which his father sacrificed and the realities of the workers' lives that he would see. The American founders believed that justice needed to be protected. They wrote the Declaration of Independence to protect and to demonstrate to the British king and also the Parliament that this natural right was not being protected in the colonies. When forming the United States, the founders protected justice in the Constitution and then also the Bill of Rights. During the Revolutionary era, 11 states replaced their colonial charters with more modernized constitutions. But Rhode Island, of course, retained the King's Charter, King Charles Charter, as its legal instrument of government. However, under this charter system, the urbanized towns paid the majority of the taxes, but really had the minority of votes in the General Assembly. In my estimation, Luther saw this charter and also the capitalist systems as still being ruled by the royal crown. Ultimately, Luther's experiences in the West evolved his ideological positions, but his horrific experience in the factories, I believe, really gave him his marching orders for what he would do and try and set out to do around the world around him. Influenced by his mother's involvement in the Baptist church and also Christian teachings, Luther discovered a religious voice by which to reclaim humanity through the words of God. Luther had adopted a militant interpretation of the Bible. Luther did believe in the purity and powerful words of the Bible. Luther's overall view of things became to be based on a strong commitment to that Republican ideology and equally firm moral sensibility rooted in religion. Luther would often make biblical references in his addresses and instruct the workers and the working class to look to the good old book, the Bible, for that spiritual guidance that they would use in the streets and then making those reforms. His religious visions would reinforce those Republican beliefs in the notion of human equality before God. Luther believed it was the Christian duty to speak out against the injustices so that true religion would prevail. True religion resided in the working man and the women who sowed but did not reap the rewards of labor. Luther argues in his addresses, has this great author of our existence, he says, scattered blessings with a partial hand. Luther argues to the contrary, that all persons were made of the same materials and subject to the same laws of our common nature. Luther lent his voice to the growing outcry for reforms who called for a reduction of the working hours and expansion of educational opportunities. He talked about the mind and the soul of the working class more poignantly in two addresses, in the state of education and also the origins of avarice, which is the biblical reference to extreme greed. For the most part, Luther's push for public education was rooted in the belief that citizens needed practical tools, not just metaphorically tools, in order to benefit from the abstract notions of equality. State-financed schools will make the opportunity for economic development and advancements a real right and reality. Luther makes the following points in his address about the state of education and the producing classes. Before I get into the quotes, I just would like to make mention that I do have some photographs of the first secondary school in Providence in 1843 after the Boer War. They are up here, for you to look at after the program. There are 2 copies, and then I also have a timeline here of events that you could also take a look at. So there is some visuals with the presentation that myself and Scott are doing. Okay, so Luther asserts in the state of education, we are not prepared to show that a spirit of monopoly exists in this country as well as in Europe, which is sapping and mining the very foundation of this free institution. We must establish manual labor schools, open alike to the rich and the poor, for the benefit of all, at the expense of all. We must make labor respectable. In a free government, education which elevates the mind and diffuses the intelligence and leads to virtue is the only sure foundation of freedom and public safety. Without education, a portion of the community is surely to be cast in the shade. Those are really powerful words. Luther makes the following point in another address that really talks and critiques capitalism and how it contradicts with Christianity and the teachings of it. He indicts the whole system for instilling a standard of values based upon wealth, with the inevitable result of increasing the sin of avarice, which is the biblical reference for extreme greed. And he declares that the only solution is complete revision and this notion of democratization of education. No American thinker in the whole early labor movement was really so acutely conscious of the world around him, such as Luther. And you talk about the whole worldwide implications of the economic system. It might have been happening over in Europe, in particular in Britain, but it is really important, to know that Seth Luther was really at the forefront of that type of ideology. In Luther's words, the great author of our existence did not design the world so that many people should be poor and miserable, in order that the few may roll and riot in splendid luxury. Luther believed that the practice of imprisoning people for debt trampled under the foot in every principle of the practices of Jesus Christ. The attacks on Luther were not always verbal, though. Along with calling his rhetoric for the 10-hour day Jacksonian tricks by the Providence Journal, he was assaulted physically and blacklisted as well. When assaulted for his activities and teachings, he boldly responded as blood would stream down his face. I glory in these wounds, knowing that they would not have been inflicted had I not advocated the cause of the suffering children incarcerated in the cotton mills of our very once happy New England town. Those are very powerful words. Now I will go to the last portion of my program, which will bring us to the Door War, the road to the Door War. Luther's militant speeches and writings began to circulate wherever Unionists would gather, especially throughout New England. During the 1830s, wage earners organized a working man's movement which demanded political and then economic rights also. Luther would be at the forefront of those movements in many ways. By 1832, Luther would be heavily involved in Rhode Island politics and was in a delegation of workers which called on the governor of Rhode Island at the time to enlist his support for the 10-hour day. He saw that the future of the producing classes could only be advanced through collective action and union through the idea of the labor movement. Furthermore, that year he traveled extensively and made speeches to rally support for the Boston strikers who threw down their tools in order to win the 10-hour day. He also began writing and selling subscriptions for a labor paper called the New England Artisan. In 1834, he was one of the founders of the Trades Union of Boston and the vicinity. He was also an active member of the National Trades Union until its collapse in the Panic of 1837. The General Trades Convention in Boston in 1834 selected him as one of the secretaries, and then a year later he helped draft a manifesto, if you will, for the Boston Circular in favor of the 10-hour day, which was reprinted in Philadelphia, where they had a strike and they shut down the city. In 1835, he addressed the National Trades Union Convention on the condition of women and children in the cotton mills. He was truly all over the place, folks. Now let's bring it back to Rhode Island. Seth Luther was a leader and organizational secretary for the People's Party, and he became a speaker for the Rhode Island Suffrage Association, which will lead us into the Door War. In closing, I would like to share a quote that I think best illustrates what Luther and the Door War was all about. Now, the fact that his father had participated in the American Revolution really seemed to give him some type of advocacy for its completion. The working man bared their arms and their bosoms in 76, which is 1776. And they are about to do it again in 36. The working man of 76 stood on our battlefields, scorned the mercy and defying the power of the foreign tyrants. And we of 36 despise the power of the domestic foes. The minions of domestic tyranny must be made to know and feel that a people to be free have but to will it. We will try at the ballot box first. If that will not affect our righteous purpose, the next and the last resort is the cartridge box. And now I would like to turn over the program to Scott Malloy. Thank you.
As Ryan said, Seth Luther was really the product of two earth-shattering revolutions, all very close to each other, and that, of course, was the American political revolution, which, of course, had all kinds of ramifications. And then right after it, in 1790, on the banks of the Blackstone River at Slater's Mill, we had the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. And at a time in American history when we're always hearing about Rhode Island being 46, 47, 48th, and anything you can pick, hey, we had the first factory in America. There are no competitors. There are no one out there trying to take credit for that. We're number one. And so we can shut everybody up at least for a couple of minutes. But Luther, who was born in 1795, who was mentioned earlier, he and a group of skilled workers, you have to remember at this particular point in time, it was the skilled workers who really had the say-so in this emerging labor movement. It would be several generations later before the unskilled and the semi-skilled would get taken in. So it's not surprising that Luther was a housewright. You know, and you say, what the heck is a house wright? Wright simply meant carpenter. So he was he did things around a home. And you had shipwrights, who were carpenters on boats and vessels. And there were several other kinds as well. And Ryan also mentioned that his brothers were all skilled artisans themselves, and they hung around with printers and other people similarly situated. Luther would complain vociferously whenever he had the opportunity, which apparently was frequently, that he felt that Rhode Island was particularly backward in the sense and in particular because so few people had the right to vote here. This was a glaring error, one that made us the laughing stock of the new nation. And as some of you know, and we'll see in a minute in the Dorr War, you had to own $134 worth of real estate. You couldn't have it in the bank. You had to own real estate or property because this gave you a stakeholder, if you will, in society around you because land was everything in those days. And so $134. What did that mean? It meant that by 1840, 60% almost of all Rhode Islanders, white males over the age of 21, born in America, could not vote. And 40% ruled the rest of our society. And there were only approximately 8,000 landholders who could vote. And ironically, among them were 2,000 eldest sons. And I'll pass this around because I do this in my class all the time. It's like makes it into kind of a museum situation. The kids actually get to say, oh my God, that thing really does say that. You know, hey, the teacher, you were telling the truth. You know, I said, thank you very much. It's nice to know that I was doing that. In order to vote, you had to have one of these little documents from the town clerk, and it said you held a freehold estate. It had nothing to do with slavery. It meant that you had a piece of property worth $134, which freed you up to vote. If you didn't have it, you didn't vote. You could still pay taxes. Or as Seth Luther would often complain, you had to serve in the militia or the fire brigades or maybe do municipal work a few days or a week every year in order to pay off your taxes. I'm always telling the kids at URI that if they don't watch it and this ever comes back, they're going to be out shoveling the snow off Route 138 as part of their tuition payments. And they kind of look like, you're only kidding, aren't you, Professor? Sure, I am.
Hi, my name is Mary Harrington, and I am with the Rhode Island Labor History Society. In this Labor Vision series, we explore some of the people and places that make up Rhode Island's rich labor history. In our first segment, we discussed Samuel Slater's successful use of machines for the first time in America to turn cotton into thread, using water power harnessed from the Blackstone River here in Pawtucket. This is an achievement historians consider one of the most important events in America's early industrial history. Today we are back in Pawtucket to discuss yet another important historical event in early Rhode Island labor history, that being the 1824 strike of women weavers. This is one of the first strikes in Rhode Island and American history, and the very first strike that included women. In fact, the women initiated it. By 1824, there were 8 water-powered cotton mills here in Pawtucket. For the past 2 summers, there had been severe droughts affecting cloth production, and profits were declining. Despite deep divisions among the mill owners over water rights and other matters, they got together and decided to cut costs in the mills by cutting the wages of the women weavers by 25% and to increase the workday for the entire workforce by an hour. By targeting the women weavers for the pay cuts, the owners expected little resistance. But they were wrong. Instead, they had faced a unified group of women who now made up a quarter of the mill's workforce. This is because of a brand new machine called a power loom that wove thread made in the mills into cloth. A large number of women had settled in Pawtucket to become weavers, although they were paid much less than the men and endured the same harsh working conditions. These new power looms required more skill to operate than the spinning machines Slater had children operate. On the first day of the strike, the women met, chose a leader, calling it a turnout. They walked away from their looms. A local newspaper called it a riot. The women resolved not to return until the owners reversed their decision on the pay cuts and the extended workday. It is more than likely that in the years since Slater built his first small mill and employed children for his machines, that the growing number of cotton mill workers had numerous disputes over wages and work rules with the mill owners. But up until this time, neither side had ever taken collective action. So why were these women able to walk off the jobs and close the mills down for a week? A major reason is that they had the support of the community. Since the 17th century, Pawtucket had been growing as an industrial town and now had a diverse array of industries and artisans and a sizable shipbuilding operation. It was not an isolated mill village where the mill owner had nearly complete control over his workers. More importantly, Pawtucket workers remained wary of the changes of industrialization. They remembered the pre-industrial workday where the sun and not the clock and the machinery set the pace of the workday. In short, the new power and authority of the mill owners felt like tyranny, and they feared that the new strict work rules would rob them of the freedoms their colonial ancestors had fought for in the American Revolution. So when the women initiated the strike, they were joined by fellow workers who surrounded the mills with them, joined them at the homes of the mill owners to express their rage, and filled the streets in the evening. We do know that the mill owners met to write a statement defending their actions and to come up with a compromise. We don't know what that compromise was. We do know that a few days later, the local newspaper reported that the cotton mills were up and running. And for the time being, with the support of their fellow workers, the women weavers had successfully limited the power and authority the mill owners had over their lives.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen on this channel 3 times each week: Tuesday at 7 p.m., Thursday at 8 p.m., and Saturday at 5 p.m. Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance to working Rhode Island families. We hope you enjoy this evening's edition.
Thank you for joining us for this evening's edition of Labor Vision, where we bring the General Assembly right into your living room. My name is James Parisi. I'm a field representative with the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers and Health Professionals, and I'm your host this evening. Today we're going to be talking about two recently enacted pieces of legislation of great significance for Rhode Islanders. We're going to talk about the child care providers' ability to organize themselves into their own organization, their own union, and we're also going to be talking about Ban the Box. And we're pleased to have the sponsor of both of those bills with us today, Representative Scott Slater. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, James.
Okay. So Representative Slater was first elected in 2009 in a special election following the death of his father, who was also a representative. He represents the 10th district of the House. It's the south side of Providence, the Reservoir Triangle area. Representative Slater serves on the very busy and very important House Finance Committee as well as the Veterans Affairs Committee. Rep, you're a graduate of Bryant University and you work for the City of Providence as a budget analyst. Do I have all that right?
Yes, you do.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here today.
Okay, so we've got a couple of big important bills to talk about, but before we do that, let's just do a little bit of background. How'd you get involved in politics? I know you grew up in a political family, but what caused you to run for General Assembly?
As you said, I did grow up in a political family. My father was a state representative before me, and I managed his campaign for many years as a younger man. And also, even younger than that, my grandparents were very much involved in Providence politics, going back to, they lived on Autumn Street, and that's where my father grew up, on the south side, and they were involved in so many different campaigns. I remember as a young man passing out leaflets in the neighborhood and just being active, very active in politics at a young age. So it's something I grew up with, and my father served our district so admirably and did such a wonderful job up there. And after his passing, I just heard from so many people. It was like a second family to me. The constituents and friends and family that lived in the area had reached out to me, and I wanted to fulfill a lot of the goals that my father had as he was running.
He certainly was a tenacious advocate and really did a great job of communicating for people in his district, in your district, in a very real way up at the State House.
Yeah, he worked very hard for not only his district, but the entire state, and he did so much on affordable. A lot of the notoriety he gets is from the medical marijuana, which had passed, but he worked so hard on so many other issues like affordable housing, also low-income issues, and a lot of things that affect so many families today. And I hear from so many families on a regular basis saying how much my father's legislation and work up at the State House through the budget process also was able to help many of their families and their relatives. So hearing that, it inspired me to want to run and have that same effect.
Sure. So other than the child care provider bill and the Ban the Box, what were your legislative priorities this year?
Well, continuing to work in my father's footsteps, one of the major legislative priorities was homelessness and affordable housing. So I had put in legislation basically to increase rental subsidies to about $3 million, and also renovating Harrington Hall, which is the shelter that many homeless use now in Cranston, and we were going to put $250,000 into renovations over there. So part of that was passed, not the whole amount as we would have liked, but we got $750,000 in the budget in rental subsidies, and we were also able to put $1 million into renovations in Harrington Hall. Mm-hmm. So those were two pretty great accomplishments, and I think it'll help many residents in our area get back on their feet.
Sure. So when you take a look back at how the Assembly did its business this past year, what do you think the major accomplishments are of the 2013 session of the Rhode Island General Assembly?
Some of the major accomplishments outside of some of the bills that we're going to be talking about, the temporary caregiver bill that was passed, I think that was great legislation. Also the minimum wage increase. Some of the budget priorities that we were able to put forth and restore some of the funding to different programs, like the affordable housing, like I was talking about, and we were also able to. So right now, for home daycare providers, or the CCAP program, Child Care Assistance Program, it's capped at about 180% of the poverty level. We're able to move that to 220%. On a pilot program. So there was kind of a cliff for many families which prevented them from earning more money, or they'd lose their child care subsidy. Now with that pilot program, we can study that and see by moving that cap up to 220 of the poverty level, that many people will be able to continue to work and earn more money and keep their child care subsidy.
Sure. So how about disappointments? What were the major disappointments for you this past session?
Well, the major disappointments basically would probably be in the budget process also. I wish we could put more money into local towns, cities and towns, and try to ease the property tax burdens. As living in the city of Providence, we had to increase the property taxes once again this year, and I think many of the residents are all taxed out, and if we could put more money into education and property taxes, I think that would be a great priority if we could do that. I mean, the budget's all about priorities and setting that up, and we were able to do some great things in there, but I think there's a ways that we need to come and easing that burden on our residents.
Sure. I know we've had on this show in the past advocates for more progressive income tax as a way to provide some property tax relief, and we know those advocates are going to be back at it next year, no doubt about that. So why don't you give our viewers a little bit of background on how the CCAP program works, and who are these child care providers that you had some legislation put in for this year?
So the CCAP program was established in the 1990s with the welfare reform, and basically what that program did was it provided a subsidy for low-income and middle-income families to assist them in child care for their families, so that when they go to work, they have that assistance and subsidy for that child care. And I met many of those families and many of the providers. A lot of people live in my area, but they're throughout the state, the entire state of Rhode Island. And I met many of them over the years of being involved in politics, and so many of them provide so much to early learning and to young people, and I think that's the greatest investment we can make in this state, is by helping out with the youngest portion of our society, and providing educational opportunities and assistance with that, and providing families the ability to go to work, and that's what the CCAP program does.
So about how many providers are in that program these days?
These days there's about 600 providers that take CCAP subsidies, and I think that program was probably about maybe double that, if not more, going back to 2003, around there.
Back when they provided more subsidies than they do these days, right?
Yes, yep, and we didn't, and back before the state had cut back eligibility on a lot of families.
So this CCAP program, is this about child care centers or people who work in centers, or are these other arrangements?
Well, centers do take advantage, can take CCAP children, but the legislation that I put in specifically goes to home daycare providers, and it would allow us to, those daycare providers to collectively bargain for the subsidies. Right now, over the years, the state has cut that program, and back, like I said, in 2003, there were a lot more child care providers, which provided a lot more opportunities to working families to get that assistance. And through the cuts and taking away the eligibility, less families have the opportunity for quality child care. And me personally, being a father of two young children, I know how important it is to know that when you go to work, it's important to have a safe, reliable childcare in place for those children. Right now, my wife's able to stay at home, which is great, but when she does go to work, that'll be a huge concern for us. So I know for working families, this is going to be great for them to have improved childcare, and by allowing them to organize and come together and communicate, they can collaborate as home daycare providers and get more training and improve the industry, and also work to improve childcare in the entire state.
So allowing these folks to organize their own union isn't just about paying benefits, is it?
No, no. So 8 other states have already done this, Massachusetts and Connecticut. 2 of those states are neighboring states. And in many of those states, when given the opportunity to organize and to come together, the child care providers in the majority of those states have advocated for the parents cutting their co-pays, increasing the eligibility for more parents to obtain child care assistance. So, and also improving their education and curriculum that they offer to the children. So that's a great thing, and I think for today and tomorrow, for our future in the state, it's vitally important that we get to early education.
Mm-hmm. So this bill doesn't automatically create unions, it just allows a process for these folks to organize.
Yes.
Is that how it works?
Yeah, basically what it does, it allows the providers to come together and to vote on whether they want to have a union and what issues. Of course, they'll be the ones that push the issues that they want to negotiate with the state and to work out with the state, and it allows them to come together as a group. It comes to basic issues too of reimbursements, and sometimes when there might be a snow day or something like that, they really didn't have anyone to negotiate. It was just kind of like cuts like right across the board. So it allowed, they don't have to have a union, but it allows them to. And I think, as we're seeing now, the majority of providers that I've talked to would like to have that, so that they have some sort of someone to negotiate on their behalf and improve the industry and improve their educational and their training and their access to those.
Sure. So the bill provides that the providers can organize and then deal with the state. Are these folks state employees? Are they going to get state benefits?
No, it specifically says in the legislation that they will not be eligible to become state employees. They also will not have health care, and they also will not have pension. So basically, it just allows them to negotiate around the CCAP reimbursement rates. Will be one of the factors. But also, like I mentioned before, was the curriculum standards. It helps them to get come together and learn more about regulations and move the industry to a better area and provide higher quality child care.
Well, that's certainly something that would interest not only the workers but businesses. What kind of reaction have you gotten from the business community about this bill? Any positive or negative feedback from them?
I haven't really heard too much from a lot of the business. I've heard some positive stuff. Back in 2003, I think the Providence Greater Chamber of Commerce did a study, and what their study showed was every dollar that this state spent on childcare brought back $1.75 of investment into the state. So, and it created many more jobs outside of just the direct child care workers throughout the state. And at that time, we had a lot more child care providers, a lot more families that were taking advantage of the child care assistance program. And I did hear from some businesses, though, that stressed the importance of, absenteeism, and when parents have safe, reliable child care, they find that absenteeism a lot less in their employees, and they get more productive employee. So,
I know that one of the primary focuses of the House and Senate leadership this year was the economy and economic development. Where do you think your bill fits into to the leadership's desire to move our economy in a positive direction?
I think it fits greatly into that, and I think it's extremely important. And sometimes you do hear some negative things out there about it, but overall, I think what this does is it allows parents to go to work and obtain work and feel safe about their children, feel like they're going to be in a reliable and daycare provider. And it also promotes retention in those daycare providers so that you have consistency and people that have been there a while and that understand the industry. And many of them have been doing it for many years, so I know they do a great job as it is right now. But just providing those opportunities for educational opportunities and to improve the industry will be great.
Was the fact that our neighboring states of Connecticut and Massachusetts having this permission to organize, did that help you when you talked to your colleagues about moving the bill?
I think so. I think it helped that Connecticut and Massachusetts, and there are other states like Maryland and New Jersey and Illinois that have done it also. Mm-hmm. But having our neighboring states do it was helpful. But also just knowing that in those areas when they were able to organize and they were represented by a union, many of the factors that they stressed were improvement of the curriculum, improve access for parents, and that was a great thing, is that it wasn't just about like wages or anything like that. It was about improving the industry.
Yeah. Does the legislation speak specifically about parents in any way?
Yes, the legislation creates a parents' council. It will be 7 members on that council. One of the members will be from DHS, which is Department of Human Services, and the other 6 members will be parents who participate in the CCAP program. And they will have to participate for 2 years. And they'll be able to provide input into improving the program and improving access and improving curriculum and just helping overall home daycare providers and the care that we provide to our youth.
That's all terrific, and it's a great story. But now I just want to take a few minutes and switch gears. We ran a show here on Labor Vision earlier in the spring about Ban the Box legislation, and you were the House sponsor of Ban the Box. Why don't you take a minute and tell our viewers what Ban the Box is and what the bill was that passed this year that you sponsored?
Yeah, well, Ban the Box basically takes the question off of job applications that say, have you ever been convicted of a felony or misdemeanor? And what that does is, the idea behind Ban the Box is to allow applicants who might have had a mistake in their past or something years ago that had happened, the ability to have an interview, like we're talking right here, and explain themselves to the employer, and not be judged just by a box on an application, so that they can obtain gainful employment and help with recidivism in our state and help people get back on their feet. Mm-hmm.
And you were able to get something through the Assembly this year. So what does the bill do? So the bill basically takes that question off job applications. And it does allow, though, the employer to ask in the interview, the initial interview too, whether they have been. So that was part of the negotiation. In the original versions, it said that they couldn't ask to the final interview. This would allow them to ask in the initial interview. So it still allows someone to get the opportunity. They look at your application, they feel like you meet all the qualifications, and you can be able to sit down with them and say, I'm not the same person that maybe made that mistake in my past, and I will work hard for you, and you won't regret giving me the opportunity, which is the main thing. When I talk to a lot of people, they said by checking off that box, they never even had an opportunity to talk to anyone or to present themselves or interview with anyone to sell themselves as a great employee that many people are, you know? Sure. When's this change effective? Did it go through right away, or? Nope, it should be going through January 1st. Okay. And so we'll have to communicate to employers about that, and also, like I talked to many of the organizations that help me out with this, like Open Doors and
DARE, Direct Action, Rights and Equality, and Rhode Island Mental Health Association, about not only working with the employers, but we also need to work with people that are trying to get back on their feet and to gain employment, to help them in interviewing and knowing how to bring something like that up and move past it and provide for their families.
Sure. And this bill had bipartisan support, didn't it?
Yes, it did. I had support from the Republican side. I had actually Representative Mike Chippendale, who signed on to this bill, who is an employer himself, and said that many of the employees that he had, the people that had criminal records in their past, they actually want to work harder, improve themselves, and make up for the mistakes that they made in their past. So it's very important to allow people to work in recovery from anything from mental health issues or drug addiction is kind of a three-legged stool we found, and having employment, housing, and treatment for your ailment or for your disease is what helps people get back into society and contributing rather than being a drain.
Sure, and that builds our economy as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Final question. I know that we have two chambers in our General Assembly. Who was your Senate colleague on the child care provider organizing, and who was your Senate colleague on the ban the box?
Senate colleague on the child care was Senator Mary Ellen Goodwin, and she did a great work over there in educating her colleagues on the bill and exactly what it did. I think before in the past the bill had come up and there was a lot of misinformation about it. And on the Senate side, it was Senator Harold Metz for the ban the box. And we also were able to work together on another bill, which is a certificate of good conduct bill, which will help people coming out just for re-entry and to get back into society. So.
That's terrific. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Actually, we're probably over time. But these were two very big, important bills that you worked on this year. It was a great success on both measures, and I'm glad you had the time to inform our viewers about what they both were about. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah. And thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision.
While they're attacking us in the forms of low wages and high cost of health care, we're not going to take it anymore. We're going to do something about it. And the City Council has finally called this measure to a public discourse and eventually a vote. Hi, I'm Andrew Tillett-Sachs with Unite Here, Local 217, the Hotel and Food Service Workers Union. And we're here today at City Hall because there's a City Council of Providence public hearing on the tax break of the Renaissance Hotel, which is worth up to about $9 million. And so the Hotel Workers Union and working class people from all over the community are here to say that we don't believe that corporate welfare should continue. And we don't believe that while the city is raising taxes on homeowners and while the city needs drastic improvements in other ways, rich, successful corporations should be receiving multi-million-dollar tax breaks. It's not right. It's class war, and corporate welfare needs to end. And we're here to say that to the Providence City Council, and we hope going forward that they act on the behalf of the Providence community, workers from every part of the city, and cut this tax break. Hacer algo para resolver este problema, para resolver esta guerra, y para cambiar la dirección de los trabajadores. Y no vamos a aguantar nada más la guerra contra los trabajadores. So, in the room upstairs, there's going to be a public debate. Several people from the community, several workers, people who fight for workers all over the city are going to testify as to why the Prakashani Group should no longer receive a multi-million-dollar tax break. And then people on behalf of the Prakashani Group are going to argue as to why the rich in this city should continue to get multi-million-dollar tax breaks. Okay? So, arriba, vamos a discutir. Alguna persona en favor de los trabajadores van a discutir que los progresantes no deben recibir nada más de este rebaje. Y algunas personas de los ricos, de los progresantes, van a discutir que sí, los ricos, los progresantes deben continuar a recibir millones de dólares en rebajas de los impuestos. So lo que vamos a hacer, what we're going to do is we're going to go in there and we're going to show
the people in that room, that the people of Providence, the actual community, don't want any more of this tax break. And we're going to do it. Everyone's going to hold up their sign that says $9 million for all kinds of other things our city should have. Better schools, better streets, better services for the everyday person in Providence. And we're going to stand united in there, and we're going to listen quietly to the debate. We're going to remain civil, and we're going to hold our signs up. We're going to hold all these signs up so the press sees it, so the council sees it, and we're going to remain together. Pero lo que vamos a hacer arriba, vamos a estar juntos, muy apretados, y vamos a llevar esos letreros que dicen $9 millones para muchas cosas para el pueblo de Providence. ¿Ok? ¿Listo? Yeah. ¿Listo? Yeah. ¡Vamos! ¡Vamos!
Yeah, I guess I should have really learned that. You can get by, but I can't right. I can't do my own translating from home.
I didn't want to screw it up. So what are they going to do with all those extra? Apparently there's like
The Renaissance Hotel has not been treating its workers particularly well, and workers have complained that also they don't believe that exploitative corporations should receive tax breaks, much less risk corporations.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen on this channel 3 times each week: Tuesday at 7 p.m., Thursday at 8 p.m., and Saturday at 5 p.m.